Good Friday evening, everyone. It's Danny Haiphong. Welcome to another Left Lens live stream, and this one is going to be a special one. So, as viewers have been requesting, this conversation will be about Xinjiang. It will be about the propaganda war on China, in particular with regards to Xinjiang, because this has been one of the most prominent talking points coming out of Western corporate media and coming out of the new Cold Warriors in the United States and the West. So as you're coming in, make sure that you are liking the video, that you are sharing it, and that you are subscribing to the channel and hitting that notifications bell so you know when we are going live here. And lastly, support the channel, of course, at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. Welcome to those in the chat. We have about an hour for this conversation, so let me get to our guest. Our guest today is Jerry Grey. He's lived in China for about 10 years now, and he has traveled through Xinjiang 4 times. And he is doing a lot of teacher training out there, but also doing a lot of debunking of this propaganda. So I thought he'd be a great guest to have. So without further ado, let's bring him here. Hi, Jerry. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's 18 years, not 10 years here in
18 years,
China.
more
Yeah,
than 10 years, I should have said that,
yeah,
almost 2 decades. Well,
almost.
welcome to the program, Jerry. First, why don't you talk about sort of maybe what brought you to China, and then, we can get into your experiences. Because I think, for me, I traveled to China right before the pandemic. It was way too short. I was in Eramuchi for 3 days,
Mm.
and it just wasn't enough. I mean, I got to see
No.
a lot. It definitely didn't feel it didn't have any of the characteristics of what the West says about it. But you've done a lot more travel. You've been in China
Mm.
for a lot longer. So if you could talk about those experiences, and maybe what brought you to talk about this particular subject, Xinjiang.
Okay. Well, thank you for the invite to talk about it. I came to China 18 years ago. Very, very simple. I was made redundant. I worked for a very, very large organization in the UK, but I was a divisional manager in Australia. I was a manager of a Chubb Security. Many people around the world will know that company. And they were taken over by UTC, United Technologies Corporation. And one of the things that happens when you have an organization like that, you have these acquisitions where large companies buy small companies. I was one of those people who used to do that. I worked for Chubb buying smaller companies. And then one day, the irony of it all was the company got taken over and I was no longer required. And so I went to college, learned how to teach, and came to China simply as a teacher. Once I was here for a little while, I decided then that I liked doing what I was doing and stayed in China. I didn't plan to stay here. I planned to finish my contract and then travel around the world with this portable skill that I'd recently acquired. And that was the really reason I came here. I had an 8-month contract to work in China, came here, get some experience, and then leave. I decided to stay, and now I've actually studied. I've done a master's degree while I've been in China, studied cross-cultural change management, which led me into an entirely different role where I became a business consultant and business trainer. And I've also, as you mentioned in the introduction, been a teacher trainer. There are literally hundreds, perhaps, I don't know, as many as 1,000 teachers who have been in and around China, have been through a training course that I conducted. It wasn't a training course I created. I was just a teacher or a trainer on that course for other companies. But that's what I've been doing. Now I'm retired. I travel a lot. I'm currently in a hotel room, as you can probably see, in Chongqing. And if anybody knows Carl Zar, he's a very popular YouTuber, vlogger, and commentator on China. This is his hometown.
Yeah. Let me all right. Yeah, no, that is all very interesting. So
Mm,
you traveled through Xinjiang, you said 4 times before we
yeah,
came live. You've done it
yeah.
all by bike, is that correct?
Not all by bike. The last 2 trips were by bike.
Okay.
The first couple of trips were years and years ago. When I first came to China, I traveled around quite a lot and just as a tourist, not an observer of anything, just a tourist. In fact, that's really what I have done. Even when I traveled by bike in 2014, for charity, a friend and I rode a bike from the border of Macau to the border of Kazakhstan, and we raised money for charity. The following year, my wife walked from Zhongshan to Beijing to raise money for charity, and we decided to do something together. And so in 2019, she and I flew with another friend, 3 of us, in fact, flew to Australia. He was from Australia. We flew to Urumqi, and then we cycled home again. And that took us the same amount of time, 57 days of cycling. In the case of coming back, the first 20 days or so are still inside of Xinjiang. So we cycled for about 20 days inside Xinjiang. The first trip, we traveled all the way to the border of Kazakhstan. So we were actually in Xinjiang for the best part of a month, traveling in that region that is supposedly the victim of a genocide, the victim of concentration camps, is supposed to be forced labor. There's absolutely no evidence of any of that I saw. And I think that's probably why I got on YouTube and I got on Twitter and started talking about this. My plan was not to talk about Xinjiang. I didn't really have a clue that what I had to say about Xinjiang would lead to the kind of publicity that it's got for me. That's not how I set out. I set out just to show photographs of China, riding through China, talk about my experience in China. And suddenly I'm a political commentator. So because of that, I've done a lot more research. I've opened my eyes entirely to what's going on. I didn't really think about it. When I first went to Xinjiang, I knew there were problems there, but they didn't affect me, and I wasn't observing those problems. And that's really a big regret on my part, because each time I've traveled through Xinjiang, I've traveled through not as a critical observer, but as a tourist. And I took photographs of us riding bikes. I took videos of us riding bikes. And I didn't take videos with the view to debunking any political narrative. I was simply a person who wanted to see Xinjiang, see China. I've traveled through Gansu and Ningxia. I've traveled through, I cycled from Heilongjiang, Harbin, the ice city, back to Guangdong. And seen lots of China, but really just as a tourist, not as a political commentator. And that's my big regret. So the next time I go to Xinjiang, I will be very much open-eyed, looking for evidence. Basically, I'll be looking for evidence to debunk, not evidence to prove, because there is no visible evidence of any forced labor. There's no visible evidence of any genocide. I've never seen a concentration camp. And people say to me, yeah, but you can hide concentration camps in the desert. Yeah, you can, but nobody's proven to me that there is a concentration camp anywhere. And I've even had discussions with people like Nathan Ruser, who is known as the satellite boy. He analyzes things, and I swear he just misunderstands, because there's a massive amount of construction going on there. All schools, all factories, they all have fenced compounds. All of them have dormitories. All of them have canteens. All of the staff wear uniforms. And if you don't understand that's the Chinese culture, it's quite easy to say, wow, that looks sinister. From a satellite 8 miles high looking down, that does look sinister. And it does. There's no question about it. The interpretation of what a Chinese factory is when you've never seen a Chinese factory, it's very easy to misunderstand.
Yeah, well, let's get into this then, because for people who may not know Nathan Rooster, he's an employee. He is one of the, I don't know what his title is. I'm guessing some
Analyst.
kind of analyst. They're all analysts or fellows. But the ASPI, the Australia Strategic Policy Institute, is his employer. And the ASPI has been at the forefront of the propaganda blitz around Xinjiang. The ASPI is a think tank. It is funded, I believe, 37% about by the Australian Defense Department. The U.S. Department of Defense also funds it quite heavily. And then to round it all off, you have military contractors, the biggest, the Fortune 500 military contractors, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, providing also large sums. So this
There's an
organization,
interesting part. I can add an interesting part to that.
yeah,
The ASPI claim that only 2% of their funding comes from the military industry complex, but they have in their funders list Thales, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, just about every name you can think of that's involved in military work funds them. They also have Naval, which is really interesting. They're the French submarine makers. And Australia, they're an Australian organization. They were set up to provide independent information to the Australian government, and that's how they started. They've turned themselves into this think tank kind of quasi-university that teaches no one, and they employ people called fellows. And there's a very interesting link to the ABC and to Murdoch Press, where people who have very, very high profile media positions are members, writers for fellows of contributors to ASPI. So what started as a tiny little Australian initiative to get independent information and threat analysis for the country of Australia has become a global behemoth in terms of what I call misinformation, because they seem to focus on China and nothing else. They have written articles on other things, but their threat analysis is on China. And I'm an Australian citizen now. I've been an Australian citizen for 18 years, actually 30 years. I was in Australia for 18 years. And what I've found now is some of my family and friends, I've even got a brother who's blocked me on Twitter because he doesn't believe what I say. I live in China, I see China, and I say things about China, but it contradicts everything that he reads. And what I've said to him is this: try and look at where your sources come from, because ASPI is the source of almost all the information about China. And they get their information from people who are not in China. Adrian Zenz is the source of the rest of the information about China. Mm-hmm. And these people are cross-referencing each other. Adrian Zenz will cite ASPI. BBC will cite ASPI. And then the next thing is a report comes out that say, BBC reports say this, and it's coming from ASPI. And BBC are quoting ASPI. Adrian Zenz quotes BBC, who quote Adrian Zenz. And it's like this circular referencing thing, which has been going on a long time, and it doesn't seem able to stop. It's really a very, very interesting thing. If you look at where the sources of this information, where they come from, where it is, it's really only three sources. Adrian Zenz is one, ASPI is another, and a group of what they call witnesses. Someone's written a book called No Escape, except the obvious thing is he escaped to write the book. Someone else has written articles about death camp survivors. Hang on, death camp survivors? Is the death camp still there? How did they survive? Why are these people no longer in China? How did they get out? Because China's borders are very secure. They got out because they got a passport issued by China, went to an embassy somewhere and got a visa issued by that. And they traveled from, because there's no embassies in Xinjiang, they've traveled from Xinjiang to another place, got a visa in their passport, and then got on a plane so they can write about how they are survivors of a death camp. The logic is just completely defied. There is no logic in this. So that's the biggest problem. ASPI are one of the biggest propagators of misinformation. Adrian Zenz, I honestly believe Adrian Zenz believes everything he writes. I believe that. His religious belief. Well, it's not true. He's a
Christian fundamentalist, yeah.
It's not true, but he believes it. And he has been to China, but I believe it was 30 years ago, 25 years ago, and he spent 10 days in China. He has a PhD based on studies inside of China and only spent 10 days of his life here. Now, people say he speaks fluent Chinese. I've seen no evidence of that. Cambridge University gave him a PhD on the topic of the sinicization of the Tibetan language in Qianhai province. Now, how much work do you need to do when you can't speak Tibetan, you can't speak Chinese, you haven't spent time there, and you've got a PhD in it? I think Cambridge University should be ashamed of themselves, or they should at least be reviewing what they're doing here. And he obviously had to defend his doctorate, and somebody didn't do a very good job there.
Yeah, well, with Adrian Zenz, I mean, he represents kind of, I guess, in the flesh as an individual. What I think the problem is with the Xinjiang narrative is that it mainly comes from mouthpieces directly connected to the United States and Western governments. Adrian Zenz is a senior fellow. He's a director at the for the I think it's called the China Studies Department at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, which was literally in 1993 spawned by U.S. Congress to spread anti-communism far and wide after the fall of the Soviet Union. So his motive, both as a far-right Christian fundamentalist and as someone literally employed to spread these messages, makes everything that we've heard about Xinjiang dubious. And I wanted to ask you, Jerry, what about these narratives drove you to speak out, and what do you think are some key points that people should know about Xinjiang that counters what we've heard about it? Because all we hear about is concentration camps, forced labor, genocide. What should we know about Xinjiang?
Okay. What caused me to speak out about it was, as I said earlier, cycling through there. I took a lot of photographs. We camped in the desert. We met Uyghurs. We ate in Uyghur restaurants. We ate in Tajik restaurants, Kazakh restaurants, Tibetan, Mongolian. There's a lot of ethnic minorities in that region. The largest of them happens to be the Uyghurs. We met a lot of those people, and there's no evidence whatsoever that they're oppressed. Now, I don't have a degree in psychology, but I have studied some psychology, and you can pretty much tell when someone is depressed. It's not that hard to guess that someone has a problem in their life, and you don't see that so much. Now, we were in Urumqi, and Uyghurs would just come up and talk to us. What are you doing here? Why are you here? And my wife took a video of one old guy just coming up to chat to us. Now, people who are living in fear wouldn't be doing that. Now, that's the main point. I didn't see any evidence. That doesn't mean it's not there. I didn't see any. And a lot of people say, well, you can't have seen the whole province or the whole region. It's not a province, it's an autonomous region. But you can't have seen it all. And that's true. I haven't seen it all. But I have seen enough to say I am not convinced that there's anything bad going on. Now, people compare it to Nazi Germany. People compare it to the death camps and the concentration camps. And let me ask a question of this. During that period of time in Poland and Lithuania and places where, I think Lithuania was Russian, sorry, in Poland and Czechoslovakia and Germany, would the German propaganda department have allowed the Hebrew language to be on their notes? So if you take a Chinese money note, you will see it has Uyghur language on it. If you travel through Xinjiang, everywhere you look, you see the Uyghur language.
Yes.
If you know anything about Chinese education, there is Dilraba, not education, sorry, entertainment. Dilraba is the most famous actress in China. She's gorgeous and she's very, very famous. Some of the most famous singers, some of the most famous actresses are Uyghur. Now, would the German propaganda department, even for the purposes of hiding their concentration camps, would they have allowed this kind of thing to have happened? So you can't compare these two things. Now, the other thing that debunks the whole myth completely is this. People say you can't travel through Xinjiang. Wrong. You can. You do not need a guide. You do not need a special permit. What you need, if you're a foreigner, is a visa for China. If you're not a foreigner, you need a Chinese ID card. You carry your passport with your visa and you can go anywhere you want to go. Now, in my case, I was on a bike, so we're traveling slowly, and I went everywhere I wanted to go. Now, admittedly, you have to go through some checkpoints. You go through security checkpoints, and that's an inevitability in a region that has suffered terrorism.
Yes.
Now, I was a police officer in London during the 1970s, 1980s. I've seen what bombs do, and I wish we had had the same facilities or the same ability to quarantine people, to quarter people, to make sure that everybody passing from this part of London into this part of London is checked. We couldn't do that. The Chinese government does. We didn't have facial recognition. Now, somebody put a tweet out this morning saying, I bet the CIA are on the ground in Xinjiang. And I would say, I bet they're not. If they were on the ground, China would know who they are. If CIA had assets on the ground inside of Xinjiang, Chinese security would have picked it up. And that would be why they have a prison population. Obviously, there's crime and they have prisons. Obviously, there is terrorism because many, many people died, not just in China, but take a look around the world and there are evidences of Uyghur bombings outside of China. So this is not just a Chinese problem. There are Uyghur separatists fighting in Idlib, and these places exist, and they have Uyghurs there who are designated by the American government as terrorists. And if you want to, you can go to Xinjiang, you can drive a car, you can catch buses, you can use the train system, you can fly. Xinjiang's very large, so some people fly around Xinjiang. To go from Urumqi to Kashgar takes hours in a car. I mean, it's an overnight train journey, and you're still in the same region. To get from Xinjiang at one end, on the eastern end of Xinjiang, to Korgash on the western end of Xinjiang, I'm just checking my directions there. If you go from the eastern end to the western end of Xinjiang, it's something like 3,000 kilometers, 2,500 kilometers. It's not something you can do easily, but it's very easy to do. And the remoteness of Xinjiang is being highlighted. Every time I read something, they say, very difficult to get to. Well, yeah, it is, because it's 5 hours flying from Guangdong to get to Urumqi. Yeah. It's probably 4 or 5 hours from Beijing to get to Urumqi. So yes, it's difficult to get to. But it's not difficult because China makes it difficult. It's difficult because of where it is. It's geographically difficult to get to. And this is the thing. Over 100 million visitors go there every year. Now, of course, COVID has slowed that down. And right now, even now, as we speak, it is closed down. Parts of it are closed down because there have been 3 or 4 COVID outbreaks, one in Urumqi, one in Dabachan, one in, I think, Hotan. And what they're saying is, if you need to visit Xinjiang, not now. But they're not saying that for any security reason. They're saying that because of COVID dynamic zero, which is an entirely different problem. One of the things I've found when I was traveling through Xinjiang, I found it very... it's a pain in the neck. There's no other way to describe it. It's very time consuming traveling through Xinjiang because you stop before you enter into any town. You stop at a checkpoint. We have to produce our passports and we have to show our visas, all this kind of thing. It's all manually recorded. With the local people, and my wife was with me and she's considered local because she's Chinese, all they need to do is to put their ID card onto a machine. It scans their face and lets them through. It takes 2 seconds, literally in and out. My wife would help stop with us because there's 2 Australians. And every time we got to there, the police would offer us water or fruit or chat with us about, oh, where are you going? What are you doing? There was no question about what are you doing? It's, oh, what are you doing? Why are you here? That was the kind of responses we got. Do you want some fruit? And can we fill up your water bottles for you? That's how they were. It was really nice, but it is a pain in the neck. Now, I thought it was a pain in the neck then. Now I'm traveling in China during COVID. It's exactly the same pain in the neck. So literally, it is just checkpoints, checking,
Right.
checking. That's all they're doing. They're checking for safety and security. And I must admit, I asked a lot of people about this. What do you think about all this security? And every single response was the same. It's much safer now. We feel better. Everyone,
Yeah.
Uyghurs, Han, doesn't matter where they come from, they felt safer. And we did get stopped by the police. There's no, I'm not going to try and hide that. The security is quite intense. And as a former police officer, I thought, oh, it's a pain in the neck, but I wish I had been able to do this in the 1970s and 80s when I was trying to stop, well, I wasn't personally trying to stop terrorism. I was just an ordinary policeman. But, we were trying to prevent terrorism. There was lots of bomb threats. There was some real bombs, and I've seen the effects of a bomb, and it's not something that you forget in your entire life. Now, here I am 40-something years later, and I still remember the sounds and the smells and the carnage. It's not something you can put away. And I wish my life had been different back then, the way that it is in Xinjiang now. So a lot of people now say, "Oh, he's an ex-cop. Of course he loves this."
Yeah.
Well, the fact is, we were just doing a job.
Well, what's so interesting for me is that I remember when I was in Urumqi, what's considered, for those who don't know, is considered like the capital of Xinjiang. It's like the most, well, it's kind of
It
like
is the capital.
Yeah, it's the capital. It's very well visited. It's like one of the big tourist destinations. It's an incredible, it's beautiful. I mean, it's a beautiful place. And you do get it's very diverse. You get a really good picture of what Xinjiang is like. I mean, all the different ethnic groups, everybody. You go to the Grand Bazaar. It's a really sweet experience. But no, I remember getting off. We took a rail there. We took the high speed rail there from a metro.
From Xi'an.
No, we were outside of Donghuang, and we had to
All
travel
right.
somewhere. I don't remember where.
That's
But
probably Human.
and
Human is the city
we had to
there.
travel by high-speed rail. It didn't take that. It took, like 5 hours. It wasn't that bad. And right away, the police were very interested in a foreign delegation with all sorts of people from different parts of the world, and they were like, mostly Western part of the world. They're like, okay, what are you doing? And they came to me and it was like, are you Turkish? And I said, no. It was like, what English say? Like, are you Turkish? And I was like, no. And then they're like, okay. And then, it took like 30 minutes, check our passports, it was a pain. But at the end of the day, in locations such as these, transportation hubs, airports, this is where these attacks were happening, right?
Yeah, as a result of that, you're safer in that region. And that's why so many people go there. They know it's a safe region. And there's another thing about China. You can criticize China all you like for its nationalism, its patriotism. And I get that. Some people don't like the fact that Chinese people are very patriotic. But they're going to Xinjiang now because of this. They're saying, well, if Xinjiang people can't get their cotton sold into the Western market, we'll go there and we'll buy it. And it doesn't replace a massive export market, but it does help the local people. And that's what Chinese people do. When someone says, we're not going to go to Xinjiang and do business there, the Chinese people say, well, you're not going to do business with me either. And so Xinjiang's business domestically has picked up. It doesn't replace the exports that they've lost, but the Chinese people will do that. And you make a comment about the security. You get off the train, and it's the only place I've been to where you arrive and go through security. You get off the plane and go through metal detectors. Hang on, didn't I just do that at the other end? And it's really strange. You're going through all these metal detectors to get into your hotel. to get into McDonald's, if you want to go into McDonald's, not that I do, but if you wanted to, or KFC, you go through a metal detector. And the funny thing is, usually there's a security guard, and you look at him, and he's like this.
Yeah,
He's
all the
fast
time
asleep.
at all the train stations. That's how it was. They're just like, it's very benign. It's much more, it doesn't feel like, in the United States, I remember coming back because it was one of these surreal experiences where you come back and people are worried about you. They're like, what happened? Did, that place is dangerous. And I remember just one of the only frustrating things I had about the security in Urumqi in general, because it was more heightened, was that as we were walking, we were trying to travel around, we were trying to go on our own and, walk the city streets. And if you pass a certain point, you have to go through the checkpoint again. And it seems like nothing when you think about it in broadly, because all they do is they take your bag, you throw your bag through this turnstile thing, and that's about it. And then you walk through, and that's it. It takes a couple minutes.
It's a lot quicker than the airport.
Yes,
it's a lot faster than the airport.
But it's
and the Chinese people, they have we're travelers, so I have this is my wife's card, my passport and stuff are in there. Chinese people just put their card onto a thing. Or I wouldn't even need to take it out of here. Just put that down, beep, and we're through. That's it. For us Westerners, it is a little slower. Yeah, there's no problem. There's no issue about that. It's slower. And, I'm not going to argue that it's fun. It's not. It's not fun at all. And I'll be honest, when we cycled out of Urumqi and spent 10, 12, 14 days, I can't remember exactly, you get to this place called Xinjiang, which is the border of Gansu. And you do breathe a sigh of relief because from tomorrow, it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to go through security. It's a really, and it is benign, but it's definitely all-encompassing. And there couldn't be a CIA agent left in Urumqi. There couldn't be. And there'd be no people working for the American government in there. But here's the interesting thing. The American government haven't been there. And neither have the British government. And I write to British politicians on Twitter all the time and say, you represent my area where I come from and you're anti-China. I get that you're anti-China, but you're talking about something which is not true. I am one of your constituents, and I'm telling you, I've been there. I never get a reply. And in fact, sometimes the members of parliament block me. Just for a reasonable question. I'm never rude on Twitter. I once said to someone, F off. But I did that for a reason. It was related to my son had cancer and passed away, and someone made a comment, and I gave him, you can get lost with that. And so the next day I deleted the tweet and apologized to my followers. I told someone to F off last night. It's very rare for me to be rude on Twitter. Very rare. And I'm not rude. I get blocked by a lot of people because I ask a question. The BBC block me, ABC block me. A lot of these media, and Adrian Zenz, of course, has blocked me. Several of the ASPI people have blocked me. And all I'm doing is asking them to clarify a point. Or sometimes I say, no, that's not true. And that's not true. And I'll tell them why it's not true. And then I get blocked. So it's not really a case of, Jerry is a pain in the butt because he's giving us misinformation. Jerry's a pain in the butt because he's asking us to prove what we do.
They don't want to deal with the facts. They don't want to deal with. They don't want to deal with the facts. And I want to ask you about something. Yeah. At the end of May, Michelle Bachelet, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights at the United Nations, she traveled to Xinjiang. She went to many different places. She spoke with many different kinds of people, from civil society all the way up to China's foreign minister. Xi
Jinping. She spoke to Xi Jinping.
Talked to Xi Jinping too. And she traveled, and she got a full tour of key areas of the region. Now, the response to that by the West, by the United States in particular, one was a lot of anger because her statement, and she did come out with a statement, because now they're talking about this assessment that may be coming out as a follow-up, and China's a bit concerned because it feels like that this assessment is going to be more about...
I don't think China is concerned.
Right. There was some.
Media wants you to think
No, no,
China is
no,
concerned.
they're not concerned, but they've made, they've spoken out and said this is going to be, they're worried, not like concerned, but they say that if it comes out, it's going to contradict what she's already said, which is her statement right after she traveled there had nothing about forced labor, had nothing about genocide, had nothing about concentration camps. And that has made the United States and the West very, very angry. And there's been an incredible pressure campaign about it. What is your reaction to this? Because this is literally the person you would think, if there was going to be any quote unquote investigation into these claims, she would be the perfect person to do it just by going there and checking out the situation herself.
Yeah, I've written about this. I've written an article about this, and I've made a video about this on YouTube as well, what Michelle Bachelet did. Let's put this into perspective, first of all. Michelle Bachelet is the head of the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights. She's a high commissioner. And as a high commissioner, it's not her job to investigate. So she never went there with the intention of investigating. So let's get that perspective right. You don't get people like the prime minister or the president of a country going there to investigate or do trade deals. They bring their minions through. Their minions may be very high-ranking minions, but they're still people who come in behind and under. And what Michelle Bachelet has done is set up a procedure so that an office will be opened. In fact, I think it's already open in China for her department. Her people will be able to, in future, have face-to-face dialogue about the issues as the issues are raised. She did raise some issues, and they were legitimate issues, and she has been sitting on a document for 2 years, I believe now, maybe 3 years, which she has promised will be released before she finishes her tenure, which is in only, what are we now, 17 days. So in just over 2 weeks, Michelle Bachelet will finish her appointment. Her 4-year term is up. Now, she's in her 70s. She took this appointment when she was in her late 60s, when most people are thinking about retiring. I certainly am. And she took this appointment to possibly the highest pressure job inside the United Nations. And she has done an excellent job of a lot of things. She did praise China for many things, particularly the poverty alleviation scheme. She praised China for a range of different factors, and she has raised some concerns. Now, I'm waiting to see this. Now, what she's done is she's sent this report to China for fact-checking. China might put their red pen through it and say, this is not true. We don't want you to say this. But the bottom line is, we haven't seen what she wants to say, and we should all wait and see what she will say. And her report will be factual. Now, will it be honest? I think it will be honest as well, because the nature of her is that I don't know if you know her history. Many people watching this will not know her history. She was actually a victim of human rights abuses. Her father died inside of a prison, and her mother and her were both arrested, both tortured, less physically, but emotionally and psychologically tortured for certain. And she spent time as an exile. She lived in Australia for a while, and she lived in what was then East Germany. Now, some people don't like Michelle Bachelet, but the fact of the matter is, this is a lady who has been through what the allegations say Uyghurs are going through. So she will have some sympathy to those people. I think we're going to get some criticism of China. It's quite obvious when you lock down a whole region the size of Xinjiang and you have to arrest people. There is no question about it. People are arrested. They had terrorism. Inside of some of their mosques, they had fundamentalism. They had extremism. These are the isms that they're talking about: separatism, extremism, and terrorism. They don't talk about fundamentalism. But what they have done now is they have negotiated with the religious leaders, one of whom was murdered by Uyghurs a religious leader in Kashgar was murdered by Uyghurs because he was a moderate. Now, when you start to murder your own religious leaders, you have a serious fundamentalism problem. And it's fundamentalism that, I know a lot of Muslims, and I've never met a bad one. It's as simple as that. I have never met a Muslim that I didn't like. Islam is a peaceful, very peaceful religion. And so should Christianity be. But we get fundamentalists, and they will murder for their cause. In Christianity, as well as in Islam, and probably in Judaism too, and all of the religions, including, if you take a look at Buddhism in some countries, Myanmar and Thailand, there are fundamentalist Buddhists. Right. The most peace-loving philosophy in the world has people who are prepared to kill because of their belief. Now, crusades, jihads, these things all start because of fundamentalism. So what China has done is re-educated. Now, can I honestly put my hand on my heart and say they didn't arrest somebody who was innocent? Impossible. And I'm sure there will be some criticism. But what I'm also sure is whatever was done that was wrong was not systematically done.
Gotcha.
Whatever overuse of, if there was torture there. Now, please don't say torture doesn't exist. It's called enhanced interrogation in American English, and it's called torture in English. I'm certain there was stuff like that going on. But was it part of a systematic process, or was it individuals who overstepped their mark? That's where the criticism will be. And I'm quite certain it exists. I'm not ever going to deny that there was some over-the-top reaction to certain things. But people were dying. People were dying on buses. People were dying in cars.
I was going to say there were some incredible incidents of mass stabbings and just...
Well, that wasn't in Xinjiang, but it was Xinjiang Uyghurs who did it.
Right.
And do you know, there's a backstory behind that? They were trying to stop from Kunming. There was a lot of migrant workers going to get a train into Xinjiang to take the jobs that the Uyghurs thought were rightfully theirs. They were from the area, and people were coming in, not as forced labor, but as migrant labor. And this is a great thing that happens in China. You have the ability to move to another province or another region, earn money in a place that's richer, and send it home to your place that's poorer. Now, that's been going on for the last 70 years, 60 years, or maybe 50 years, but certainly since Open and Reform.
Right. Shenzhen
is almost 100% non-Shenzhen born people. Most of the Greater Bay Area, massively, this is where I live, in the Greater Bay Area, not far from Macau, and it's massively migrant workers. They come from poorer places, earn the money here, send it home. They live in dormitories and save money. They eat in canteens and save money, and they send their money home, and their region gets richer as a result of it. And that stabbing, that mass stabbing in Kunming Station, which is quite a long way from Xinjiang, was to prevent migrant workers moving into what is already, or was already, a very poverty-stricken region and taking jobs that rightfully belong to the local people. So their fundamentalism went that far. So that's why it had to stop. And that's why it had to be hard. And it was. There is no question about it. It's a very, very tough process to stop fundamentalism. France is doing it. France has got the same problems. I think parts of quite a few places in Northern Europe have fundamentalism issues. Certainly the UK does. More so now than when I was living there and when I was a police officer there. We did have some, very few, but we did have some fundamentalists. But the problems we had in the 1970s in the East End of London, Brick Lane and Lewisham and places like this, these were Christian fundamentalists smashing the windows of the Pakistani Islamic people who were living a very normal, peaceful, loving life and contributing to society. And it was the white Christians who were doing exactly what the fundamentalist Islamists were doing in China and in France and in Sweden and other places. And America too, I've no doubt.
You know what you're saying, I think, is is very important because this went very far. There were the Urumqi riot, Urumqi riots. There
Yeah,
were lots. I mean, hundreds upon hundreds of people died. So to think
yeah,
that there aren't going to be strong reactions to that
there has to
by
be.
a
Yeah.
government is just kind of wishful thinking, because
Mm.
you have to stop that kind of chaos. And a lot of it was actually ethnically targeted. A lot of these fundamentalists would target people of different ethnic groups and Uyghurs as well. So it was a very problematic situation, and China responded
One
in
of
kind. But I wanted to
one of
ask
the
you about.
biggest I was going to say one of the biggest problems was that the Uyghur fundamentalists were attacking the Uyghur moderates.
Yeah,
It wasn't so much they were attacking the Han. They may have blamed the Han for their problem, but they were attacking the Uyghur moderates who were in their mental state. They were colluding with the Han. They were
gotcha.
collaborating with the Han, and that's what was the problem. So what China had to do was separate water from wine, effectively. Go into that area and say who's a fundamentalist and who isn't.
Yep.
And how do you do that? You kind of corral them all, and then maybe you lock them up for a few days while you question them, find out some background information, and then you say, okay, we eliminate that one, let them go, eliminate that one, let them go. And that's probably what they're talking about with this mass incarceration thing. Now, I don't know if that did happen. I've got no evidence to say it did. But if I was in charge, that's how I would have done it. I would have locked everybody up until I could eliminate them, remove them from my inquiries, and then you only end up with the bad guys in there. And once you've talked to everybody, you can usually find out who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you've got them all, but and of course, people would say I'm a human rights abuser for thinking that way. But the fact is, people were dying, and they were dying regularly, and now they're not.
Yeah, and let's talk
Human
about
rights.
that. Let's talk
Yeah.
about this because you have more than 30 Muslim majority countries on the side of China's response. You have much of the world outside of the West and the United
Mm.
States,
Yeah.
and of course some of their fringe partners in Asia. You have much of the world, though, at the very least, not willing to condemn China for its response to the problem of terrorism. And you have a situation now, and this is, I don't think, a coincidence that after 2016, this is when we started to hear about Xinjiang. This is when we started to hear about it because these attacks weren't happening anymore. The Western media was more than fine about covering this problem before Xinjiang became a really key issue for propaganda. More than fine with it. The AP, you name the Western media source, the BBC, they were talking about these attacks, and they were talking about them not as China repressing
No,
the Uyghur
as
people. They were talking about them
terrorism.
as terrorism.
Yeah.
And then now, over the past 4 or 5 years, the narrative has changed, and it's completely, I think, drawn a huge kind of a blind spot for people in the West because they can't see how China actually responded. Can you talk about this? Because for me,
Yeah.
what it is, it's rather than what the United States did, which was really take a very draconian government approach, like police approach, very much so like we are going to literally follow people, get who it's non-discriminatory. Then also wage and view it in the language of war. We're at war with Muslims, with Arabs in the country, and we're also at war with Muslims, Arabs outside of the country. And that's what happened. Bombs were dropped abroad, and things got a lot tougher in terms of and more strict at home. But China, it took a different approach. There was no war in Xinjiang. There was no invasion of Xinjiang. And there was a lot of attention on education, employment, and other things. Could you talk about this response?
Yeah, what they've done in Xinjiang is quite amazing. And I'm talking about from when I first went there in 2005 to when I was last there in 2019. Now, the only reason I haven't been there since 2019 is not because of any security concerns. It's partially because of COVID. I've had a lot of other things to do. But the differences between Northwest China now and Northwest China 15, 18 years ago, the first time I went, is inconceivable. You cannot comprehend the scale of investment and infrastructure. Xinjiang has got this enormous swathes of changes. And one of the big ones is the mechanization. John Deere, the American company, has a massive factory in China building cotton harvesters. And yet we've got this allegation that there's forced labor in cotton harvesting. I'd love to know how that happens when John Deere's profitability has skyrocketed inside of China by selling the very things that Americans, this is an American company, the Americans are saying this is what's happening, and John Deere are reporting completely the opposite. So things like that are really strange to me, and nobody seems to correlate those two pieces of information. How can the world's largest manufacturer of things like cotton harvesters be making so much money inside of China when China is forcing people to pick cotton? These two things just, they don't exist in correlation. So that's one issue. If you travel through, and the first time I traveled through on a bike, 2014, we were in the Gansu and Xinjiang region, and the roads were terrible. I mean, so terrible that some stages we literally had to pick our bikes loaded with all the gear and carry them across certain parts of the road. That's how bad the roads were. On one occasion, or more than one occasion, we actually went up an embankment and got onto what I would call a motorway, you call a highway or a freeway. And we're not allowed on there on bikes, but we got on there, we took everything off, walked up the embankment, went over the fence, put our bikes across, carried all our bags up, put the whole thing back on, and then cycled down the freeway. And the police didn't stop us because they knew how bad the roads were. The roads disappear into the desert. The road was a tarmac road until it's not. Now it's a dirt track. Now it's sand. And there's no road. It's gone. And this is the G312, the main road from Shanghai to the border of Kazakhstan, disappeared into the desert. And we had to get off it and get onto the G30. And now this road, it's 2019, only 6 years later, this road is an 8-lane highway. And it's just beautiful tarmac all the way to the east, and you just all the way to the west. Sorry, you can't fault what they've done there. Massive amounts of infrastructure. Now, every single factory that has started in that region, and this is where Adrian Zen gets his data. He sees that there is loads of concrete, there's loads of bedding, there is loads of steel, there are loads of fencing, razor wire, all these things. Cattle prods are another thing. But that's an interesting thing. This cattle prod is not a cattle prod like a zzz, zzz for this. It's a long stick with a U on the end of it. And they're in every petrol station, service station. They're in every school has got them. Many schools have, not every. They're all over China. Everyone's got them. And they're designed to stop someone from being a bad guy. If someone comes at you with a knife, what are you going to do? If you've got this long pole with a U on the end of it, you can just hit him in the chest and he's disabled. His knife is disabled, and that's what they're for. So bad things can't happen. Now, people look at that and go, that's oppressive. No, it's not. It's defensive. That's the way to look at it.
I mean,
China building a navy is not aggressive. It's defensive. China doing anything is seen as aggressive. But if you take a look at China's history, it's all defensive. This is what they do. They make sure that things can't happen by defending against those things happening. It's why China has massive surveillance and no crime. My wife or I can walk around the streets of any city in China at 1 o'clock in the morning. I can come home drunk from the bar if I want at 1 o'clock in the morning and no one will bother me. Why? Because there's no crime. There is no crime there. And I'm not saying there's no criminals in China. I'm just saying that it is completely and totally safe 99% of the time. I've never heard of a rape. The murder rate inside of China is 0.5. The murder rate in America is over 6, but in some cities is as high as 65 per 100,000 people. Now, We don't have that here. No one's afraid to go out. And that's what Xinjiang has become. And it's not just Xinjiang, it's the whole of China. Xinjiang has it more and had it harder and faster because of the particular problems that existed there. Now, yeah, Uyghurs do still get checked. If a Uyghur, I know several Uyghurs as well, and they tell me they get checked all the time. They get checked more than I would as a foreigner. They get checked more than my wife because they're Uyghurs. What are they doing? Why are they there? It's a check. It's nothing more than that. It's not more sinister. It's a check to see who they are, what they're doing, why they're doing it. Uyghurs run businesses all over China. And that's the bottom line. If you're a Uyghur, you can go anywhere in China. You can open a business, start a business. You can become a film star. You can become a singer. You can sing songs in your own language. And this. Go on TikTok. There are thousands of Uyghurs. Now, people can say that's stage managed. The 30 Islamic diplomats who came, Islamic observers who came here, you stage manage it. Yeah, you are stage managing it to a point. You're showing them what you want them to see. But they've still got eyes and ears, and they are going shopping, and they are wandering around, and they're in the community. Now, you can't tell me that you can stage manage a diplomat. They have diplomatic immunity, and that diplomat says, I want to go down there. That's where they're going. They want to go down there. They're going to go down there. Now, there may be a place that you say this person can't go. You can't go inside that high security prison. You can't go to that border because it is dangerous. Now, yeah, that's possible. I don't know many people realize this in America, but Xinjiang actually has a border with Afghanistan, and it is quite a dangerous place. There could be snipers in Afghanistan waiting to take someone down if there's a right person goes to visit that border crossing. So the police say it's probably not safe to go there. They don't say you shouldn't go there because we have security concerns about what we're doing. We have security concerns about what you're doing and what could happen to you. But no one has ever, on my bike, I had 3 cameras. I had a phone and I had 3 cameras. I had one on my hat and stuff like that. No one ever said to me, what did you take pictures of? Where are your pictures? Let's have a look. No one has ever said to the BBC, give us your memory card. Remember, the BBC go there and they have disputes with the police. Well, you have a dispute with the police in a totalitarian, authoritarian police state. You don't come out with your cameras intact. Go to a place that is totalitarian and have a dispute with the police and see what happens. Yeah, that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. No, people tell me all the time, and it's not, it's like, people in China, they're always arguing with the police and they're always talking to them, and there's always it's a different feel. It's here there's a lot of fear of, the police in the United States kill a lot of people, and there's a lot of violence here in the United States when it comes to police. So the feel is different. You don't generally want to just be like going up to police and having disputes with them, right? A lot of people fear that. Most people fear, especially Black people, especially ethnic minorities. But in China, totally different feel. There is not that. I mean, we were lost. We walked into a very tiny, like, hut, I would call it, of police. And they're just
all over on every street corner.
Yeah. We,
all over China, not just Xinjiang.
I know.
All over.
We couldn't find the bathroom, and we couldn't speak it well enough to be able to say, where can we find the public bathroom? So
WC works everywhere. WC.
So he so they looked at us very strangely, laughed at us, and then let us use their toilet. But it was just a different feel. And I want to ask you one more question before we go, because we are, I'm going to stay on, everyone, for another half hour or so stick around. I want to ask you one more question, Jerry. Why the propaganda? Because everything you're saying is, one, countering that narrative just from experience, but also from what you know and what you've studied. And then there's the why question. Why is there so much propaganda about this region if it is so different from the narrative that we continue to hear?
I'm not a geopolitician or geopolitical expert, but so here we go. There is a hell of a lot of oil in Xinjiang. There's gas in Xinjiang. So there's 2 reasons why America would want to destabilize it. Now, America would like China not to be the dominant economy in the world. And China is going to be the dominant economy in the world very soon. And I think it'll happen sooner than the experts predict. So that's a major factor. Now, how can America stymie the growth of China? They can pick a region that is very remote and difficult to get to because of its remoteness, because of its geography, and say something bad is happening there. And the fact that that region has an Islamic community, a large Islamic community, gives them the impetus to do that through there. Now, Hong Kong is another one. You can destabilize Hong Kong because it has a Western educated mindset. A lot of Hong Kong people are educated under the British system, and so their cultural values, their views of human rights and freedom and things like that are very different to the Chinese views of human rights. As far as Chinese people are concerned, my view of human rights is as long as everybody's getting on harmoniously, everybody's happy. And nobody seems to care that the government suppresses freedom of speech, because you can say anything you want as long as you're not telling lies, being hateful, inciting violence. But you can actually criticize the government. You can do whatever you want to, as long as you don't do any of the insightful, nasty things. So the values of one region are being used to weaponize against the values of another region. Islam does that very, very well, or using Islam. Sorry, not Islam doesn't do it, but using Islam as your excuse. That's what I think the Americans can see. They say, we want to slow down the growth of China. We want to stop the growth of China. Then Islam is a good tool to use, especially in a region which is so remote that almost no foreigners go there. Foreigners who live in China go there, but foreigners who come to China to visit, they do the Beijing, they do the Three Gorges, they do the Hong Kong shopping experience, and they do a few other things, but maybe the Xi'an, the terracotta warriors, they do these guided tours of China and don't get to see China as she really is. Those people don't go to Xinjiang because it is too far. If you've got 2 weeks in China, you don't want to spend 5 hours on a plane to get there. You've just spent 17 hours on a plane to get to China. I'm not going all the way to Xinjiang. And so they know that they can say what they want. And there's only people like me who they then say, don't listen to him. He's just a security guard who retired and rides a bike. He can't even afford a car, that guy, he's a loser. And, when he went to China, he was a kindergarten teacher. Bullshit. But that's how they talk about me. So they can denigrate me and say, this is what we think about this guy. And that's the biggest problem that China has right now, is its size. Nobody is prepared to travel all the way to go and look. And now you have so much propaganda that it's impossible to say, where there's smoke, there must be fire. It's impossible to say that's all propaganda, because there's just so much of it. And I understand why people believe it. It's impossible to pick up a newspaper, read an article. It's impossible to know anything about China that's true, because it's all untrue. 98% anyway. And you've got people like the Grey Zone and the Co-West Pro papers. I can't emphasize that enough. If anybody has not done this, I'll send you the link and you can put it in the description, please. Jack James is an Australian lawyer, and she has done an incredibly good job and written these articles called the Co-West Pro papers. And they are really damning to the anti-China narrative on Xinjiang. She doesn't talk about Taiwan or Hong Kong or any of the other problems, just Xinjiang. And she really has got it right. So that's all I can say about Xinjiang.
Well, Jerry, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on. Everyone stick around. I'll be on for another 25, 30 minutes to send us close out the program. So stick around. But Jerry, where can people find you?
I'm on Jerry Grey, on Jerry's Take on China is my YouTube, Jerry's Take on China, and I'm on Twitter with the same name. I have 2 Twitter accounts. I set up one to be less political, but they're both pretty political now. It's impossible not to be. So I'm Jerry's China and Jerry's Take on China, and I'm on Jerry's Take on China on YouTube. But that's only small, just recently started, and getting it going at the moment at 1,500 followers now, but hopefully 15,000 in a few months.
Yeah. No, I'm actually finding it now so I can put it in the chat so people can
Okay.
subscribe to your channel because they should.
Thank you.
But yeah, no, thank you so much for coming. Stick around, everyone. And Jerry, we'll have to talk again soon. Appreciate you taking the time.
Look forward to that. Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks a lot, Danny. And thank you to all the viewers, listeners, all the good ones. I'm sure there's some nasties out there too.
Well, we have moderators who get rid of the nasties.
I can't see the comments at the moment because I'm not in the live feed.
We get rid of. There's always trolls, but we kick them out because there's no point for them to be in there. But thanks so much, Jerry, and we'll talk again soon. Bye-bye.
Roger. Bye-bye.
All right, everyone. Keep liking the video. Stick around. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already.